Welcome to Testify. I hope you all are doing well. Today we're going to take a look at the book of Judges. So please stay with us as we do a Bible study on this book, and I'm sure that this will help you while reading the book. So the book of Judges, chapter 1 to 2, is the introduction. The book of Judges begins with the tribes of Israel in their territories within the promised land. Now, after Moses died, Joshua led the Israelites to the land that God had promised them. So while Joshua defeated some of the Canaanite towns, there was still a lot of land to be taken and a lot of Canaanites still living in the areas. They tried to drive them out, but unfortunately, it was difficult to do it. So the Israelites just left some of them there and decided, let's just, live in the land with them. Chapter 1 gives us a long list of Canaanite groups that Israel failed to drive out from that land. The reason why God wanted them to drive out the Canaanites was to avoid being influenced by the moral corruption and the worship of their gods, as well as some of the child sacrifices that the Canaanites were involved in. God had called Israel to be a holy people, but that did not happen. In chapter 2, we see how Israel simply went along with the Canaanites and began to adopt all their idol worship. In chapter 2, we also see how the narrator gives us an overview of how Israel would become like the Canaanites and would sin against God. God would then in turn allow them to be persecuted and conquered by the Canaanites. Eventually, the Israelites would see the error of their ways and repent, and then God would rise up a judge from Israel who would defeat the enemy and bring a period of peace. Sooner or later, Israel would sin again, and the cycle would start all over and over again. And this is what we see in the book of Judges, a cycle of a judge being put in place. Israel then becomes obedient. When the judge dies, Israel goes back to sinning. In Judges chapter 3 to 16, this is where we see the introduction of the 12 judges. So the first judge of Israel was Othniel, and he was the nephew of Caleb. Remember Caleb and Joshua from the book of Joshua. Othniel married Caleb's daughter. He was known for defeating the Canaanites in battle, and he led Israel to 40 years of peace. Then there comes Ehud, who was the second judge of Israel. His story was very interesting because he created a two-edged sword in which he conquered Eglon. Now Eglon was the king of Moab. He killed him at a tribute festival in his private chambers. Then we get introduced to Shamgar, who was the third judge, and he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Now, an ox goad is a stick they used back in the day to shepherd animals or shepherd the sheep or the ox, normally used by a shepherd to usher them into a certain place that they needed them to be in. Deborah was the fourth judge of Israel, and she partnered with Barak and led Israelites to victory over the Canaanites. Deborah, a prophetess and a judge, summoned Barak to lead the army against the Canaanite king Jabin and his general Sisera. Barak agreed only if Deborah accompanied him, he would accept. And so they succeeded in battle. And another heroine was Jael. Jael was a Kenite woman who killed Sisera the general, who found safety in her camp during that same battle. Then we come to Gideon. Gideon was the fifth judge of Israel, who was found to be a coward at the beginning. And when we say he's a coward, he did not believe in himself. He constantly tested God 2 to 3 times, asking him to show him whether he was the one that was chosen by God. But eventually he comes to trust that God can save Israel through him. God instructs him to break down his father's altars of Baal, which he succeeds in doing. He defeats a huge army of Midianites with only 300 men carrying nothing but torches and clay pots. Gideon also kills the 2 Midianite kings in battle, and to make matters worse, he also makes an idol from the gold he won in battle. And after he dies, all of Israel worships it as a god, and that cycle begins once again, as I explained earlier. The 6th and 7th judges of Israel was Tola and Jair, who were minor judges of Israel, and they judged for a small period of time. The 8th judge was Jephthah. Jephthah was a ruffian who lived in the hills. He was chased away by his half-brothers as he was the son of a prostitute. When things got really bad for Israel, the elders came to Jephthah begging him for leadership. Jephthah actually proved to be a very effective leader as he won lots of battles against the Ammonites. But in the end, he made a silly vow to God that if he won the battle, he would sacrifice the first person that came out of his house to greet him. Unfortunately, in his case, his daughter was the first person. He did as he promised God, and he sacrificed his daughter. The 9th, 10th, and 11th judge of Israel was Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon, and they were also minor judges. And then we come to the 12th judge of Israel, who was the one and only Samson, who I'm sure we all have heard of. Samson's life was full of promise, but he had no regard for the God of Israel. And why do I say this? He was very promiscuous, he was very violent, very arrogant, and women seemed to be his weakness. Delilah eventually leads Samson to death by betraying him to the Philistines. The Philistine rulers bribed Delilah to discover the secret to Samson's great strength, which she time and time again hides from her, until she persistently coaxes the truth out of him. She learns that his strength is derived from his uncut hair. She then has the hair cut, rendering him very weak, and turns him over to the Philistines for his demise. After he was captured by the Philistines, they brought him to the temple of Dagon, which is their god, another idol, to mock him and to celebrate his downfall, where he prayed for the one last act of strength from God to avenge himself against the Philistines. His final act of strength resulted in the destruction of more Philistines than he had killed during his lifetime. Samson then died when he collapsed the Philistine temple by pulling down the 2 central pillars, killing himself, the Philistine lords, and the Philistines. We now come to chapters 17 to 21 of the book of Judges, and Israel descends into more self-destruction. And here we are reminded of 2 important stories. The first story is a story about a Levite named Micah who builds a private temple to an idol. This temple is then plundered by a private army sent from the tribe of Dan. The soldiers from Dan steal everything, but much worse, they burn the peaceful city of Laish to the ground, murdering all its inhabitants. This is horrifying because Israel yet again forgets its God. The second story is about Micah. Micah's concubine dies after being raped. He dismembers her into 12 parts and sends them to all areas of Israel to show this terrible act. And as a result, 600 men of Benjamin were killed, which was the aftermath of the war because of the Levite and his concubine. So I hope you enjoyed this Bible study, and I hope it helps you when reading the book of Judges. It's quite an interesting book, and I urge you to read it. Thank you for listening, and join us for more. Take care.